Commander Zefkar stood on the bridge of his warship and looked at the stars through the main window. His dark green skin showed many scars from old battles, and his forearms moved with the grace of a warrior who had fought for 300 years. The Valyrian Empire had ruled this part of space for over 2,000 years, and Zefkar was one of their best commanders. He had won battles against the fierce Crotha raiders, the sneaky Zeltari pirates, and even the mighty Draconian fleet. Every species in the galaxy knew to fear Valyrian warships and their skilled crews. Today brought news that made Zefkar feel insulted. The Galactic Council had given him a new mission to work with a newly discovered species called humans. These creatures came from a small blue planet called Earth in a quiet corner of the galaxy. Their technology was so primitive that they had only learned to travel faster than light just 50 years ago. Most civilized species had mastered that technology over 1,000 years earlier. Zefkar had seen reports about human ships, and the images made him laugh. Their vessels looked like pieces of metal welded together by children. Where Valyrian ships had smooth curves and elegant designs that showed centuries of advanced engineering, human ships were ugly boxes with no style at all. Their weapons were even worse. They still used kinetic projectiles like ancient civilizations, while modern species had moved to energy weapons long ago. The worst part was that the Council wanted him to evaluate whether humans could become useful allies in the ongoing war against various pirate groups and hostile species. Zefkar could not understand why the Council would waste his time with such a primitive species. He had better things to do than babysit newcomers who barely knew how to fly between stars. He walked to his command chair and activated his personal computer to write his preliminary report. The screen glowed with soft blue light as he began, typing with two of his hands while the other two adjusted controls on his chair. Initial assessment of human military capabilities, he wrote. Based on available data, humans show minimal potential for independent military operations. Their technology is outdated, their tactics are unknown, and their ships appear to be poorly designed. Recommendation: humans may serve as auxiliary support forces under direct Valyrian supervision, but should not be trusted with important missions. Lieutenant Kextar approached the command chair with careful steps. The younger Valyrian had served under Zefkar for 20 years, and knew his commander's moods well. Sir, we have received detailed specifications for the human vessels that will join our next mission. Zefkar took the datapad without looking up from his report. The information made him shake his head in disbelief. Human ships had armor made from simple steel alloys instead of the advanced composite materials used by civilized species. Their energy shields were so weak that a single hit from a Valyrian weapon could probably destroy them completely. Most shocking of all, their crews were much larger than necessary because they had to operate many systems manually instead of using automated controls. Look at this, Zefkar said to his lieutenant while pointing at the data. Their main weapons, fire metal slugs using chemical explosives. We stopped using such primitive technology before my grandfather was born. Their fastest ships can barely reach half the speed of our slowest cargo vessels. How do they expect to survive in real combat? Kextar studied the information carefully before responding. Sir, there are some unusual aspects to their design. Their ships seem to be built to take heavy damage and keep fighting. They have multiple backup systems for everything, and their hulls are much thicker than necessary for their technology level. Thick hulls will not help them when they face enemies with real weapons, Zefkar replied, with a dismissive wave of one hand. These humans have probably never faced serious opposition. Their planet was isolated until recently, so they have no experience with galactic warfare. They will panic at the first sign of real danger, and we will have to rescue them. The commander continued writing his report with growing irritation. He had earned his position through skill and experience, gained in hundreds of battles. Every victory had taught him something new about warfare and strategy. He understood how different species fought and what tactics worked best against various enemies. The Crothans relied on overwhelming numbers and brutal frontal attacks. The Zeltari used hit-and-run tactics with fast ships. The Draconians preferred massive vessels with powerful weapons that could destroy enemies from long range. Humans seemed to fit none of these patterns because they had no pattern at all. Their military doctrine appeared to be non-existent. Some of their ships carried heavy weapons, while others had light armaments. Some were built for speed, while others seemed designed for defense. It was as if they had no clear idea what they wanted their fleet to accomplish. Perhaps, Zefkar thought as he finished his report, humans are simply too primitive to understand proper military organization. They probably build whatever they can afford without any real plan. He saved the document and sent it to the council with a feeling of satisfaction. Soon this embarrassing assignment would be over and he could return to important work. The stars outside his window seemed to twinkle with amusement, as if they knew something he did not. The human fleet arrived at Kepler Station 3 days later than scheduled, and Zefkar was already annoyed before they docked. Punctuality was essential in military operations, and the humans had failed their first test. He stood in the main docking bay with his full dress uniform and ceremonial weapons to show these newcomers how real warriors presented themselves. The first human ship to dock was called Liberty, and it looked even worse in person than in the reports. The hull showed clear signs of battle damage that had been repaired with patches of different colored metal. Scorch marks from energy weapons covered one side, and several antenna arrays were obviously replacement parts. Any civilized species would have built a new ship, rather than fly around in such a damaged vessel. Captain Jake Morrison was the first human to step off the ship, and Zefkar was surprised by his appearance. The human was shorter than expected, with gray hair at his temples and lines around his eyes that suggested many years of experience. His uniform was clean but practical, with no decorative elements at all. Most shocking of all, he walked directly toward Zefkar with his hand extended in some kind of primitive greeting gesture. "Commander Zefkar," Morrison said with a smile that showed his white teeth. "It is an honor to work with the famous Valyrian fleet. I have heard many stories about your victories against the Crotha raiders." Zefkar hesitated before taking the offered hand with one of his own. The human grip was firm and warm in a way that made the Valyrian uncomfortable. Physical contact between different species was usually avoided except during formal ceremonies. This casual touching suggested that humans had no understanding of proper diplomatic protocol. "Captain Morrison," Zefkar replied while pulling his hand back quickly. "Your arrival was delayed. In Valyrian military tradition, punctuality shows respect for your allies." Morrison nodded with what appeared to be genuine understanding. "You are absolutely right, and I apologize. We had to stop to assist a damaged freighter that was drifting without power. The crew was running out of air, so we could not leave them." The explanation made Zefkar even more confused. Military vessels had important missions that should not be delayed for civilian problems. There were rescue services specifically designed to handle such situations. Why would humans risk their military schedule to help strangers? "Come aboard Liberty," Morrison said while gesturing toward his ship. "I would like to show you our operations before we begin the joint mission." The interior of the human ship was as primitive as Zefkar had expected, but also strangely efficient. The corridors were wider than necessary and filled with pipes and cables that should have been hidden inside the walls. Everything looked functional, rather than elegant with no artwork or decorative elements anywhere. The crew members they passed all nodded respectfully to their captain, but continued working without stopping to salute or bow. Morrison led them to the bridge, which was smaller than a Valyrian command center, but seemed to work well for the human crew. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was operating the navigation console with quick, precise movements, while Engineer Pete Collins monitored the power systems from a station covered with manual switches and analog displays. The technology was definitely primitive, but the crew used it with impressive skill. "We received the mission briefing about the Crotha raiders," Morrison said, while activating a holographic display that showed the target area. 15 merchant ships have been attacked in the past month, and the raiders are getting bolder. Intelligence suggests they have at least 20 vessels, including several heavy cruisers. Zefkar studied the tactical display and nodded approvingly. The information was accurate, and the human presentation was clear despite their limited technology. Standard Valerian doctrine for this situation involves using our superior range and firepower to engage the raiders from a safe distance. Our shields can absorb their primitive weapons, while our energy cannons destroy them systematically. Morrison asked several questions that seemed strange to the Valerian commander. He wanted to know about escape pods on Krotha ships and how many crew members each vessel typically carried. He also asked about civilian casualties in previous battles and whether the raiders took prisoners or killed everyone immediately. "Captain," Zefkar said with growing impatience, "these details are not relevant to our tactical planning. The objective is to eliminate the enemy fleet as quickly and efficiently as possible. Concerns about individual enemy crew members or potential prisoners will only complicate the mission." "I understand your point," Morrison replied calmly, "but my crew likes to know what we are facing. It helps us prepare mentally for combat when we understand the complete situation." The human captain introduced Zefkar to more of his crew during the tour, and each meeting was stranger than the last. Dr. Susan Blake ran the medical bay and asked detailed questions about Valerian biology so she could treat wounded allies if necessary. Sergeant Carlos Mendez commanded the security teams and wanted to know about Krotha hand-to-hand combat techniques in case boarding actions became necessary. Navigator Lisa Chen studied stellar charts of the mission area and identified 3 different escape routes in case retreat became necessary. Every human seemed to be preparing for problems that might never happen. Valerian crews focused on their primary mission and trusted their commanders to handle unexpected situations. These humans appeared to expect trouble and were already planning how to deal with it. "Your crew is very thorough," Zefkar observed while they returned to the bridge, "but perhaps too focused on unlikely scenarios. Proper planning should concentrate on achieving victory rather than preparing for failure." Morrison smiled again, with that strange human expression that seemed to combine amusement and sadness. "Commander, in our experience, battles rarely go according to plan. The side that adapts fastest to changing conditions usually wins." The statement made no sense to Zefkar. Proper planning and superior technology were the keys to military success. Valerians had proven this truth in thousands of battles over many centuries. These humans, with their damaged ships and primitive weapons, could not possibly understand the complexities of real warfare. As he prepared to return to his own vessel, Zefkar felt even more convinced that this assignment was a waste of time. The humans seemed friendly and well-meaning, but they were clearly not ready for serious military operations. He would need to keep them safely in the rear during the actual battle to prevent unnecessary casualties. The joint fleet found the Krotha raiders near the Meridian asteroid belt, exactly where intelligence reports had predicted. Zefkar commanded the operation from his flagship Retribution, while the human ships Liberty, Defiance, and Courage took supporting positions behind the main Valerian battle line. The plan was simple and elegant, like all good military strategies. Valerian vessels would use their superior weapons and shields to destroy the enemy fleet, while the humans observed and learned how real warfare was conducted. From his command chair, Zefkar studied the tactical display that showed 23 Krotha vessels arranged in their typical chaotic formation. The raiders had no discipline or proper battle tactics, which made them dangerous but predictable. They would charge forward in a mass attack, hoping to overwhelm their enemies with sheer numbers and savage fury. Against primitive opponents, this strategy often worked, but against Valerian technology, it was essentially suicide. "All ships prepare for engagement," Zefkar ordered through the fleet communication system. "Maintain formation Delta 7 and engage targets at maximum range. Human vessels will remain in reserve position until the battle is concluded." The Crotha ships detected the Allied fleet and immediately began their expected charge. Their vessels were ugly things covered with spikes and weapon ports that fired randomly in all directions. They screamed war cries over open communication channels and accelerated toward the Valerian line with reckless abandon. It was exactly what Zefkar had anticipated. Valerian energy weapons opened fire when the raiders came within range, and the first enemy ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The advanced targeting systems locked onto multiple targets simultaneously, while the defensive shields absorbed the wild return fire without difficulty. Everything was proceeding according to plan, and Zefkar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This would be another easy victory to add to his impressive record. Then Lieutenant Kekstar's voice cut through the bridge chatter with urgent alarm. "Commander, we have new contacts jumping in behind our position. 20 more Crotha vessels are approaching from the rear." The tactical display updated to show the trap that had been carefully set for them. While the main Crotha force had charged forward to draw their attention, a second fleet had used the asteroid belt to mask their approach and jump to hyperspace exit points behind the Valerian formation. Now the Allied fleet was caught between two enemy forces with raiders attacking from both directions simultaneously. Zefkar felt a cold fear in his stomach as he realized the tactical situation had become extremely dangerous. Valerian ships were designed for long-range combat with heavy forward-facing weapons and strong front shields. Being attacked from behind meant their weaker rear defenses would be quickly overwhelmed. The enemy had used superior numbers and clever positioning to turn their technological disadvantage into a winning strategy. "All ships execute emergency maneuver pattern 12, Zefkar ordered while trying to maintain his calm command voice. "Redirect power to rear shields and prepare for fighting withdrawal to jump point Alpha." But before the Valerian ships could begin their retreat, Captain Morrison's voice came over the communication channel with surprising calmness. "Retribution. This is Liberty requesting permission to engage the rear enemy formation." "Negative," Zefkar replied immediately. "Human vessels are not equipped for this level of combat. Maintain your position and prepare to cover our withdrawal." "Commander," Morrison said with the same steady tone, "with respect, we did not come here to watch. My ships are moving to attack." The three human vessels broke away from their reserve position and accelerated directly toward the larger Crotha force that was attacking from behind. Zefkar watched in amazement and horror as the primitive human ships charged into overwhelming enemy fire with what appeared to be complete disregard for their own safety. It was the kind of suicidal bravery that would accomplish nothing except getting good people killed. But as the humans closed with the enemy fleet, Zefkar began to see that their attack was not as reckless as it first appeared. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez on the Defiance performed impossible maneuvers that used her ship's damaged thruster array to spin and fire in directions that should have been blocked by her own hull. The kinetic weapons that had seemed so primitive suddenly proved their worth by punching through Crotha armor that was designed to deflect energy beams. Engineer Pete Collins on the Liberty somehow rerouted power systems to overcharge weapons that should have overloaded and destroyed themselves. Instead of following standard operating procedures, the humans were improvising solutions that no textbook had ever described. Their ships moved in coordination that seemed almost telepathic, as if the three crews were sharing the same mind. The Courage, commanded by Captain Lisa Chen, took a direct hit from a Crotha heavy cruiser that should have destroyed her instantly. Instead of exploding, the human ship rolled with the impact and used the energy transfer to accelerate even faster toward her target. Chen somehow turned what should have been fatal damage into a tactical advantage that allowed her to ram the enemy vessel's weapon array and disable their main guns. Zefkar had been fighting battles for 3 centuries, but he had never seen anything like what the humans were doing. They were not just adapting to impossible situations, but actually using their disadvantages as weapons against the enemy. Their supposedly inferior technology was being employed in ways that its designers had probably never imagined. All Valerian ships concentrate fire on the forward enemy group, Zefkar ordered, while watching the tactical display update with new information. The humans are giving us an opportunity to eliminate half their fleet. The tide of battle was turning, but not in any way that Zefkar had expected. Instead of the disciplined Valerian technology winning through superior planning, it was human creativity and impossible courage that was saving the day. The raiders, who had seemed so confident in their trap, were now caught between two forces and losing ships rapidly. As explosions lit up space around them, Zefkar began to understand that everything he thought he knew about warfare might be wrong. The battle reached a critical point when the massive Crotha command ship broke through the defensive line and began targeting the smaller human vessels with its heavy weapons. Zefkar watched the tactical display with growing concern as the enemy dreadnought used its superior size and firepower to methodically destroy everything in its path. The vessel was 3 times larger than any ship in the Allied fleet and carried enough weapons to fight an entire battle group by itself. Captain Lisa Chen's ship Courage had already suffered severe damage from multiple hits, but continued fighting with remarkable determination. Her engines were operating at only 30% capacity, life support systems were failing throughout the ship, and her main weapons had been reduced to a few functioning point defense guns. Any rational commander would have ordered immediate retreat to preserve what remained of the crew and vessel. Instead, Chen did something that challenged everything Zefkar understood about military logic. Her voice came over the communication channel with calm determination that seemed impossible, given her desperate situation. "All ships, this is Courage. We are going to ram the command vessel." Zefkar felt his 4 hearts skip several beats as he processed what the human captain had just announced. Ramming attacks were suicide tactics used only by desperate crews who had already accepted death. Even if the Courage managed to damage the enemy dreadnought, the human ship and everyone aboard would be completely destroyed in the collision. It was a waste of trained personnel and valuable equipment that served no strategic purpose. "Courage, this is retribution," Zefkar transmitted urgently. "Do not attempt ramming maneuver. Your sacrifice will not significantly damage such a large target. Retreat immediately and we will cover your withdrawal." But Chen had already committed to her impossible plan, and the damaged human ship began accelerating toward the Crotha dreadnought with everything her failing engines could provide. The enemy vessel turned its main weapons toward the approaching threat and opened fire with devastating barrages that should have vaporized the Courage instantly. Somehow, the human ship survived the incoming fire by using debris from destroyed Crotha vessels as improvised shields. As the distance closed to only a few thousand meters, Zefkar prepared to witness the heroic but pointless destruction of the human vessel and her crew. Then Chen did something that no military academy in the galaxy had ever taught and no commander had ever attempted in recorded history. "Emergency separation protocol activated," Chen announced over the communication system. "All hands brace for impact." The Courage suddenly split into 2 sections as explosive bolts released the crew compartment from the engine and weapons section. The drive portion continued forward on its collision course, while the habitat module veered away from the target. At the last possible moment, it was a maneuver that required perfect timing and incredible skill, because a mistake of even a few seconds would have killed everyone aboard. The explosion when the Courage's drive section hit the Crotha command ship was spectacular beyond description. The impact occurred at the exact point where the enemy vessel's main reactor connected to its primary weapon systems. Instead of just damaging the dreadnought, the collision triggered a cascade failure that destroyed half the ship's combat capability in a single moment. But the truly remarkable part was what happened next. The crew compartment from the Courage was now drifting in space without engines or heavy weapons, but the humans inside were not finished fighting. Sergeant Carlos Mendez led a boarding party using nothing but magnetic boots and portable airlocks to reach the damaged Crotha vessel. While the enemy crew was still dealing with fires and system failures, the humans entered through a hull breach and began fighting their way toward the command center. Zefkar watched in amazement as his tactical display showed human life signs, moving through the interior of the enemy dreadnought. The boarding party was outnumbered by at least 10 to 1, but they used the confusion caused by the collision to their advantage. They moved through damaged sections where the Krotha crew could not effectively defend and systematically disabled critical systems from the inside. "Commander," Lieutenant Kekstar reported with disbelief in his voice, "the human boarding party has reached the enemy bridge. They are demanding surrender of the remaining Krotha vessels." The situation was completely unprecedented in galactic military history. A crew that had lost their ship was now in control of the enemy flagship and using it to command the entire battle. The remaining Krotha raiders found themselves receiving surrender demands from their own command vessel, and most were too confused to continue fighting effectively. Within minutes, the Courage's crew had gained control of the dreadnought's communication systems and began coordinating with the Allied fleet to eliminate the remaining enemy vessels. Carlos Mendez appeared on the main display from the captured Krotha bridge with a satisfied smile and a few minor injuries from the boarding action. Retribution. "This is Courage Actual," Mendez reported while Krotha prisoners were secured in the background. "We have control of the enemy command ship and are ready to assist in mopping up operations." Zefkar stared at the tactical display, trying to understand what he had just witnessed. A human crew had lost their own ship, captured the enemy flagship, and turned a desperate situation into total victory. They had accomplished something that no military strategist would have considered possible, and they made it look almost easy. "Outstanding work, Courage," Zefkar finally managed to respond. "Retribution and all Valyrian vessels are moving to support your position." As the battle wound down with the remaining Krotha ships either destroyed or surrendering, Zefkar realized that his understanding of warfare had been fundamentally changed. The humans had not won through superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They had won by refusing to accept that victory was impossible and finding creative solutions that no one else would have even attempted. The primitive species he had, dismissed as inexperienced newcomers, had just taught the most advanced military force in the galaxy a lesson in tactical innovation that would be studied for generations. In the aftermath of the battle, Zefkar surveyed the debris field that stretched across several thousand kilometers of space. Pieces of destroyed Krotha vessels drifted among the wreckage of human and Valyrian ships, while rescue teams searched for survivors and recoverable equipment. The victory had been complete, but the cost had been higher than anyone had anticipated when the mission began. The human losses were particularly severe because their ships were less protected than Valyrian vessels. 230 human crew members had been killed or seriously wounded during the engagement, and most of their ships would require extensive repairs before they could return to active service. The Courage was completely destroyed, except for the crew compartment that had been separated during the ramming attack. Yet as Zefkar moved through the temporary medical stations that had been set up on his flagship, he noticed something remarkable about the human survivors. There was no despair or anger among them despite their heavy casualties. Instead, they worked alongside Valyrian medical teams with quiet determination to help anyone who needed assistance. Dr. Susan Blake had converted one of the Retribution's cargo bays into an emergency medical facility and was treating wounded from both human and Valyrian crews without any distinction between species. Her surgical skills were impressive despite the primitive human medical technology she was using. When Zefkar questioned why she was spending equal time on both groups, she looked at him with surprise. "They are hurt and need help," she said, simply while continuing to work on a Valyrian engineer who had been injured when his console exploded. "I do not understand why you would ask such a question. Pain is the same for everyone regardless of what planet they come from." The statement made no sense to Zefkar because military medicine usually prioritized your own species first and allies second. Resources were always limited during combat situations, so difficult choices had to be made about who received treatment. Yet Dr. Blake seemed to treat every patient as equally important, which was inefficient, but somehow felt right. Commander. Rick Torres had lost his ship Defiance early in the battle, but was already organizing salvage operations to recover useful materials from the wreckage. He was not trying to claim valuable enemy technology for human use, but instead cataloging everything that could be recycled or repaired. When Zefkar asked about his priorities, Torres explained his reasoning with typical human directness. Every piece of metal and every electronic component represents resources that someone worked hard to create, Torres said while reviewing inventory lists on a damaged tablet computer. We cannot bring back the people we lost, but we can make sure their sacrifice helps protect other families by using what they left behind. The human approach to casualties and losses was completely different from standard military practice. Valerian crews honored their dead with formal ceremonies and then moved on to the next mission. Emotional attachment to fallen comrades was considered a weakness that interfered with rational decision-making. Humans seemed to carry their losses as motivation to fight harder and protect more people. Zefkar found Captain Morrison in the observation lounge, looking out at the debris field through a large window. The human commander had been wounded during the battle, but refused medical treatment until his crew members were taken care of first. His left arm was in a support sling, and there were bandages covering cuts on his face from flying debris when his bridge was hit. Your people fought with remarkable courage today, Zefkar said while taking a position next to Morrison at the window. But I do not understand why you took such terrible risks when safer options were available. Morrison smiled with that same expression that Zefkar was beginning to recognize as uniquely human. It seemed to combine sadness and determination in a way that no Valerian face could duplicate. Commander, we fight differently because we fight for different reasons than your people do. Explain, Zefkar requested, while settling into a chair that accommodated his forearms comfortably. Valerian military doctrine is based on achieving victory with minimum casualties and maximum efficiency. Your tactics seem designed to maximize risk rather than minimize it. You fight for honor and duty and the glory of your empire, Morrison replied while continuing to watch the rescue ships moving through the wreckage. Those are good reasons, and I respect them completely. But humans fight for each other. Every person on every ship represents someone's family back home who is counting on us to bring them back safely. The explanation helped Zefkar understand why human crews took such extraordinary risks to save their comrades. They were not following abstract military principles, but protecting people they cared about personally. It was inefficient from a strategic perspective, but it created a level of motivation that no amount of training or discipline could match. Lisa Chen knew that ramming the command ship would probably kill her entire crew. Morrison continued while pointing toward the wreckage of the Courage. But she also knew that if the Crotha dreadnought was not stopped, it would destroy the Liberty and Defiance and kill hundreds more people. She chose to risk 30 lives to save 300. And the boarding action afterward, Zefkar asked, was that planned or improvised during the battle? Morrison laughed quietly, which was another human expression that the Valerian commander was learning to interpret. Carlos Mendez had been studying Crotha ship designs for weeks before this mission, because he wanted to be prepared for any situation. When the opportunity came to capture their flagship, he already knew exactly where to go and what systems to target. The human capacity for preparation and adaptation was becoming clearer to Zefkar as he learned more about how they approached warfare. They did not rely on superior technology or overwhelming force like most species. Instead, they prepared for every possible scenario and then improvised solutions when unexpected problems arose. As the two commanders sat in comfortable silence watching the cleanup operations, Zefkar realized that his preliminary report about Human military capabilities had been completely wrong. These people were not primitive or inexperienced. They were something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. 3 months after the battle at Meridian Belt, Zefkar sat in his private quarters aboard the Retribution, writing his final report to the Galactic Council. The document would determine how the galaxy's most powerful military alliance would interact with humanity for generations to come. Every word carried enormous weight because his assessment would influence policies that affected billions of lives across hundreds of star systems. He had spent weeks reviewing battle recordings and interviewing human crew members to understand exactly what had happened during the engagement with the Krotha Raiders. The more he learned about human military thinking, the more he realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare was incomplete. His species had mastered the science of combat, but humans had discovered something far more powerful. Final. Assessment of human military capabilities, he wrote at the top of his report, by Commander Zefkar of the Valerian Imperial Fleet. The cursor blinked on his screen as he carefully chose his words to convey concepts that no military report had ever attempted to describe. The human species represents a fundamental change in galactic military doctrine that cannot be measured using traditional standards. Their approach to warfare differs so completely from established practices that new evaluation methods must be developed to assess their true capabilities. Zefkar paused in his writing to review video footage from the battle that still amazed him every time he watched it. The image of the Courage splitting apart moments before impact had become famous throughout the Valerian fleet. Young officers studied the maneuver, trying to understand how Chen had calculated the timing so perfectly under such extreme pressure. Human military effectiveness does not come from superior technology or numerical advantages, he continued typing. Instead, it comes from their fundamental nature as a species. Where other civilizations rely on proven tactics and advanced equipment, humans possess something that no amount of technology can duplicate. They have an absolute refusal to accept defeat even when facing impossible odds. The report was unlike anything Zefkar had ever written because it required him to admit that his previous understanding of military science had been wrong. Valerian doctrine emphasized careful planning, superior firepower, and minimal risk. To friendly forces, human doctrine seemed to emphasize adaptation, sacrifice, and maximum commitment to protecting their comrades. Furthermore, he wrote, humans demonstrate unprecedented capacity for innovation under extreme pressure. Their ability to improvise solutions to tactical problems exceeds that of any species previously encountered. They do not simply adapt to changing battlefield conditions, but actively use those changes to create new advantages. Zefkar remembered his conversation with Captain Morrison about why humans fought so differently from other species. The explanation had seemed simple when he first heard it, but the implications were staggering when fully understood. Most civilizations fought for abstract concepts like honor, territory, or political goals. Humans fought for each other with a personal intensity that transformed everything about how they approached combat. The human approach to casualties and losses differs significantly from standard military practice, the report continued. Rather than becoming demoralized by setbacks, human crews appear to draw strength from adversity. Each loss increases their determination to protect remaining personnel and complete their mission successfully. The door chime interrupted his writing, and Lieutenant Kekstar entered with a datapad containing the latest intelligence reports. Commander, we have received updates on human military activities throughout their territory. The information supports the conclusions in your assessment. Zefkar reviewed the new data with growing amazement. Since the battle at Meridian Belt, human ships had been involved in 17 different engagements against various pirate groups and hostile species. In every case, they had achieved victory despite being outnumbered or outgunned. More importantly, they were sharing their tactical innovations with allied species instead of keeping the advantages for themselves. They are teaching other species how to modify their ships for emergency separation procedures, Kekstar observed, while highlighting relevant sections of the report. They are also providing training on boarding actions and damage control techniques that no one else had ever developed. The generosity was typical of what Zefkar had learned about human nature during his time working with their crews. They did not view military knowledge as something to be hoarded for competitive advantage. Instead, they treated it as information that could save lives, and they shared it freely with anyone who might benefit. I have fought alongside 17 different species across 300 military campaigns, Zefkar wrote in his conclusion. I believed that my experience had taught me everything important about the nature of warfare itself. The humans have shown me that I understood only the mechanics of fighting without grasping the deeper principles that determine victory and defeat. He saved the document and transmitted it to the Galactic Council with a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. The report would probably surprise many leaders who expected humans to be primitive newcomers requiring guidance and protection. Instead, they were about to learn that this young species might have more to teach than to learn. Looking out his window at the stars, Zefkar could see human ships on patrol throughout the sector. Their crews were continuing to refine and develop the tactics that had proven so effective against the Crotha raiders. More importantly, they were inspiring other species to think differently about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of military service. War is not about superior technology or overwhelming numbers, he said quietly to himself while watching a human vessel pass by his window. War is about the willingness to sacrifice everything for what you believe in, and humans believe in each other with an intensity that changes the nature of conflict itself. The preliminary report he had written before meeting the humans seemed like it had been created by a different person. That Zefkar had been confident in his knowledge and dismissive of primitive newcomers. This Zefkar understood that he had been given the privilege of witnessing something remarkable. He had seen the birth of a new era in galactic warfare, where courage and creativity mattered more than technology and tradition. The stars continued their ancient dance across the cosmos, but everything else had changed forever.